They expected fireworks, speeches, posturing. The new species entering the galactic stage should have arrived with fragile pride or desperate optimism, some display of emotion the Council could deconstruct and classify. Instead, the humans sent a signal. No voice, no face. Just a single message transmitted in every known language. We observed. No clarification, no envoy, no context. Then, silence. In the vast circular chamber of the Galactic Assembly. The silence was not peace. It was suspicion. 1,000 species watched one another, pretending diplomacy, masking the unease crawling beneath their scales, chitin or skin. And in the center, seated with rigid posture and unreadable eyes, sat Commander Ilara Voss. She wore no ceremonial robes, no glimmering rank, just matte black fatigues, threadbare at the elbows, an old Earth military sigil pinned crooked at her collar. She said nothing. She watched. A whisper passed through the delegates like an electric current, not through mouths, but through linked minds and pheromonal pulses. Is this how Earth acknowledges the Assembly? Where are the others? A military figure, not a diplomat? Do they think they're better than us? Ilara's gaze remained steady, unyielding. She wasn't here to soothe anyone. The cage-high speaker, a gelatinous mass with a diamond eye core, rippled indignantly. Is this humanity's first act of diplomacy contempt? Ilara blinked slowly, her voice low, unhurried, human. We don't play at diplomacy. We don't speak when we haven't listened. It wasn't a declaration. It was a warning. The assembly chamber stirred. A few species, old enough to know the weight of restraint, leaned forward, not with anger, but curiosity. Others young. Empires, arrogant fleets bristled. The speaker clicked. Then you admit observation without participation. You accept the consequences of secrecy? A moment passed, then another. Ilara's gaze didn't flinch. We accept nothing. We remember. Everything. The lights dimmed for the next scheduled delegation, but the center chamber remained focused on the silent, unmoving figure from Earth. One representative. One sentence. The universe had seen empires rise on thunder and fall in silence. This was different. This silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. She still dreamed of the fire, not its light, but its silence. The memory returned unbidden as Ilara sat rigid in her diplomatic chair, her fingers clenched beneath the surface where no one could see. Time folded. The assembly vanished. She was back on Orion 6. The sky had cracked open like brittle glass. No sound, no wind. Just a low vibration in her bones, as if the universe had drawn breath and then forgotten how to exhale. Civilians ran, their mouths open in screams that made no noise. Ships fell upward, then sideways, as gravity convulsed like a dying animal. She remembered her daughter's hand small, warm, gripping hers with the fierce confidence of a 6-year-old who hadn't yet learned. The universe could lie. Then the air blinked. Shimmered. Not exploded. Blinked there, and then not. And the hand was gone. No scream. No warning. Just the absence where a child had been. She found herself crawling through broken corridors smeared with plasma streaks and shredded thoughts. Not blood. Thoughts. Whatever had come, it didn't just consume bodies. It unmade identity. Memories died mid-formation. Names evaporated from minds before lips. Could shape them. The void hadn't needed weapons. It was the weapon. They called it a spatial decay event. A malfunction of deep core gravity labs. A catastrophe. The science reports said containment breach, but Ilara knew. Something came through. Something not meant to perceive or be perceived. The survivors, if that's what they were, could barely speak. They wept without knowing why. Faces were blurred, even in memory, like smudged fingerprints on glass. Ilara didn't escape. She was left, pulled from the rubble by drones with no eyes, carried aboard an autopiloted frigate whose crew had dissolved into static and empty armor. She never found the remains of her daughter, only a ribbon, burnt at the edge, still tied in a perfect bow. Even now, a decade later, she sometimes reached for it in her jacket pocket. Not for comfort, for proof she hadn't imagined her. Some things survived the void. Not many, but some. Ilara didn't flinch when a diplomatic drone whirred past her head, its silver tendrils brushing the air like spider limbs. She merely stepped aside, back straight, eyes forward. Always forward. She had learned not to look over her shoulder. That's where ghosts lived. They said she was difficult, cold, paranoid, that she hadn't been the same since Orion 6. But the truth was simpler than that. She hadn't changed. Everyone else had just softened. The former commander of Strike Unit, Kilo 6, now walked alone through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Embassy Station. Her team had scattered some into politics, others into retirement or exile. None stayed in the line of fire. Not after what they'd seen. Not after what they'd lost. Captain Nauman, once her second in command, now smiled for alien cameras, shaking tendrils and pseudopods, spouting unity like a mantra. Ilara had watched a hollow recording of him a few weeks back. His eyes didn't blink the same, as if something vital had been sanded down. She'd sent him a message. "You're wearing his voice like it still fits." He never replied. The others dead, or dead inside. And Ilara had no use for the latter. The doors hissed open as she entered the human embassy's strategic briefing chamber. Dr. Andre Kalin stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, studying a display of non-Euclidean energy patterns on the holograph. The light shimmered around him like a halo made of fractured logic. Andre was Earth's first and only official ambassador to the Galactic Assembly. Not military, not intelligence. Just Kalin. Brilliant. Incomprehensible. Chosen not by vote or appointment, but by consensus, unanimous, unexplained. He turned without turning, as if he already knew she had arrived. Ilara, still wearing armor no one asked for. "Someone has to," she said flatly. His eyes were too calm, too kind. It made her skin itch. "They fear what you remind them of," he said, his voice smooth like static over velvet. "What we are when we're not pretending." Before she could respond, a sharp chime echoed through the embassy channel, an official request. Councillor Vrex, Speaker of the Thrall Dominion, was calling a session. Again, Vrex never missed a chance to prod, to accuse. His species had fought 3 wars before understanding language, and diplomacy to him was another form of weaponry. He appeared on the screen, scales like molten copper, voice like cracked stone. "We demand clarification. Earth's silence is not neutrality, it is preparation. What are you building in the Mars Bastion? Why does your kind whisper to the dark zones beyond mapped space?" Ilara narrowed her eyes. She could almost feel Kalin smiling behind her. "We remember everything," she said. VRX hissed. "And you forget nothing. That makes you dangerous." Kalin leaned forward. "Then let us be perfectly clear, Counselor. We're not dangerous because we remember. We're dangerous because we survived forgetting." The screen went dark. A cryptic transmission is received from Earth. "We are coming." Suddenly, all human communication stops. Ilara is ordered to investigate, but she senses something is being hidden even from her dot. It arrived without encryption. No cipher, no watermark. Just a raw band pulse across every known channel, bouncing off relay satellites and wormhole gates, leaving a digital scar behind in its wake. "We are coming." 3 words. Earth origin. Verified by a dozen independent scans. Source: unknown facility. Unlisted in planetary databases. Transmission duration: 0.74 seconds. Then silence. Total. Human diplomatic channels, defense satellites, orbital drones, all dark. Ilara stood over the blinking readout in the assemblies. Secure intelligence chamber, her jaw rigid. Dozens of alien species scrambled behind her, some shouting, some clicking, some vibrating in panic. The signal hadn't just been heard. It had unsettled. Across the galaxy, sensors failed. Navigation. Grids warped. AI cores hiccuped, as if trying to forget something they hadn't yet processed. She spoke first. When did the blackout begin? An insectoid analyst buzzed with uncertainty. 90 seconds after the signal. All synchronized systems linked. To Earth ceased functionality. No errors. Just off. Kalen appeared in the doorway. No rush, no concern, just his usual disarming serenity. Ilara hated how calm he looked. You knew, she said without turning. Didn't you? I suspected, he replied. She faced him now. You knew this was coming, and you didn't warn anyone. Not even me. He gestured to the display. There are forces in motion that no warning can stop. You, more than anyone, should understand that. Her fists clenched. The room stilled as if afraid of what might happen next. Then came the order. Single encrypted packet from Earth's Mars Bastion, the last functioning outpost in Sol before the blackout. Addressed to Commander Ilara Voss and no one else. Assignment. Investigate signal source. Reactivate contact. Retrieve surviving command chain. Clearance. Ultra-red. Authority. Overwatch Directive 1. She read it 3 times before responding. Send me in, she said. Alone. Kalen tilted his head, intrigued. You expect resistance? No, she answered. I expect the truth is something I shouldn't. Survive. And still, part of her wanted to. Part of her needed to know what Earth had become. What they were hiding behind the phrase, we are coming. Because if she knew anything, it was this. Humans never announced their arrival. Unless what was. Arriving wasn't entirely human anymore. Ilara stepped off the dropship into silence that didn't sit still. Breathable. The temperature regulated, and the power grid hummed through the ground beneath her boots. By every metric, the colony of Harkin's Reach was alive, but it was also empty, not devastated, not decomposed, just missing. The streets were swept, doors unlocked, meals left half-eaten, now fossilized in cold stasis. Lights flickered in automatic cycles, playing out routines for an audience that no longer existed. She moved through the colony center with rifle, drawn not for defense, but focus. Her mind wanted to scream, to fill the silence with speculation. Instead, she kept it quiet, professional, tense. This wasn't abandonment. It was erasure. Inside the command center, terminals blinked, patiently awaiting logins from fingers now dust. She keyed into the system using her credentials. Nothing happened. Not access denied, just nothing. No response. That was the first red flag. The second came 2 levels below ground. In the auxiliary data core, Ilara found the remains of 5 consciousness. Matrices neural imprint containers, once used to simulate colony oversight through uploaded human minds. They had been cooked from the inside out, casings warped, fluid bubbling. One bore a handprint, scorched into the metal, as if someone had tried to claw their way out from within. Human minds, burned alive without bodies. She scanned the log feeds. The encryption was not just advanced, it was illegal. Black ice grade, untraceable, and reactive. When she tried to access it, the screen hissed, and the terminal melted, literally liquefied, like it had been made of wax. A cover dash-up. She no longer suspected. She knew. Ilara turned on her body cam and began narrating, even if no one was left. Hear it. Power levels remained stable. No signs of biological decay. AI systems entered or selectively wiped. The matrices were not damaged in an accident. They were executed, purposefully. Contained systems scrub it on a time delay. Who did this knew I'd come. She paused outside the data core. Something moved, not walk-dragged. Like metal being hauled across stone. She killed the light. No. Breath, no motion. Eyes adjusting to the dark. And then she saw it. A figure at the far end of the corridor. Not a person, not even a body. Just the outline of armor. Elara's armor. She stepped out into the corridor, gun raised, but the corridor was empty. The armor had vanished. Only a single item remained where it had stood. A child's ribbon. At the edge, the first strike came without warning. A human research vessel in orbit over Zel 4 went dark. Minutes later, the colony's surface erupted in molten streaks. Flash ignited from orbit by plasma weaponry too precise to be accidental. No distress call. No survivors. Then came the next. The colony of Vesta 9 was reduced to ash by an unknown craft. That never showed up on sensors. Surveillance drones caught only fragments of splintered outlines of ships. No species in the assembly claimed. Their hulls shimmered like oil underwater. Their weapons left no heat signature. No debris. They struck only human settlements, selectively, efficiently, without declaration, and Earth? Still silent. No counterattack, no communication, no retaliation. The assembly hall buzzed with suspicion, vibrating with the overlapping voices of over 30 galactic nations. The news feeds called it the Ghost War. Rumors bloomed like fungus. Earth had defected to some hidden enemy, or Earth had become the enemy. Counselor Vrex paced before the chamber's dais, tail lashing. This is not an escalation. It is extermination. The Terrans vanish from their posts. Their homeworld seals itself. And now their kind are hunted, and they do nothing. Others muttered assent. A few barked in protest. The diplomats of the Sigari enclave urged caution, as did the more isolationist members of the Pax hegemony. But the mood had shifted. War didn't need facts. It needed only fear. Kalen stood on Earth's behalf, hands behind his back. He said nothing for a full minute. And then, these attacks do not originate from humanity. Vrex hissed. Prove it. We will, Kalen replied. When the time comes. Too late. Vrex slammed a scaled hand on the dais. Preemptive disarmament must be authorized. We cannot wait for Earth to decide what it is. The vote was called. Elara, watching the feed from her orbiting outpost near Andari Belt, felt the momentum shift in real time. Worlds once loyal to Earth voted neutrality. Others leaned toward aggression. They didn't want to wait for answers. They wanted control. And somewhere, above some forgotten star, another human colony burned. But Elara didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't a war. This was a purge. And someone wanted Earth quiet, long enough for it to happen. He moved like a spider wrapped in silk. Limbs too long, movements too smooth. A predatory stillness observing, calculating, always watching. Real Toke, intelligence operative of the Korth Accord, boarded Alara's ship without request and introduced himself without apology. I am assigned to you, he said simply, by vote of the Council. Your presence now demands oversight. She didn't shake his hand, assuming the gesture wouldn't mean the same. Spying, then. Observation, he corrected. You are ... interesting, and statistically more likely than any other variable to be at the center of your species. Sudden silence. You think I triggered it? I think you survived what others did not. That makes you relevant. Elara said nothing. Let him linger in his own suspicion. She knew men like him, alien or not. They didn't believe in chaos. Only in patterns they hadn't cracked yet. And they'd flay you open for the code if they thought you were the key. Still, she let him stay. By the third day, she'd learned his silences were louder than his words. He read her files when he thought she wasn't looking. He studied human architecture, physiology, even psychology. Riltok didn't want to know her. He wanted to know how to break her if needed. He got his chance sooner than either expected. On the icy moon of Varela 5, they searched another abandoned human station. This one older, colder, with blood frozen in the cracks of the walls. Elara. Elid, Riltok followed. Then the lights went out. No warning. No ambient hum. The fusion core shut down like a breath sucked inward and held. They weren't alone. Figures emerged from the cold mist. Not soldiers, not drones. Worse. Puppets. Humans. Still breathing, but hollow-eyed, twitching, moving in perfect sync like puppets with invisible strings. Their skin pulsed with faint red veins of artificial origin, spiraling into the base of their skulls. They're linked, Riltok whispered. To what? Elara asked. That's when they charged. Riltok reacted faster than she expected, using his neural filament to create a hard light barrier, while Elara dropped 3 of the husks with precision fire. But more came. From the ceiling. The vents. The floor. One leaped. Riltok caught it mid-air and snapped its neck with surgical coldness. We are not dealing with native tech, he said. This is parasitic command override. Elara shoved a charge into the central generator panel. Then let's not be here when whatever's pulling their strings comes to check its signal. They ran side by side. No commands. Just instinct and violence. Back aboard her ship, bleeding from a gash along her thigh, Elara turned to the Korath agent, breathing hard. You saw what they were. Not drones, not infected, controlled. Riltok nodded slowly. Humans, modified to receive orders. To persist even when you're silent. Elara met his gaze. Still think I'm the anomaly? No, he admitted, eyes narrowing. I think you're the last unaltered human the galaxy still has. They stared at each other for a long moment. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was understanding. 2 survivors, orbiting truths too big to speak aloud. Riltok broke it with a question. If your people are capable of that. He paused. Then why haven't they unleashed it fully? Elara's answer was a whisper. Because maybe they already have. He lived underground beneath a shattered mining platform orbiting a dead star. No official designation. No power. Grid. A shadow of a man nested inside a shell of static and insulation. Leon Cross. Once a name whispered in Earth's top research circles. Then erased. Elara only found him because of the pattern's distorted bursts in long-range thought wave. Residue. The same frequency as the neural puppets. But inverted, like a mirror scream. She and Riltok descended through layers of electromagnetic fog and ruined metal, finding Leon hunched in a gravity-neutral pocket, surrounded by analog hardware, manual power cells, and walls painted in lead. He didn't greet them. Just stared. His voice cracked like a dry machine when he finally spoke. You brought a watcher. He's with me, Elara said. For now, Riltok said nothing. Only watched. Leon laughed a hollow, bitter sound. And I guess we're all infected. Elara stepped forward, careful. We need answers. You need forgiveness. She didn't flinch. Start talking. He looked at her like she was already gone, then turned to a rusted terminal and keyed in a sequence. Holograms flickered unsteady, dying images of minds torn apart by stimuli. Not pain, not violence. Thoughts. Ideas too big to hold. Patterns that rewrote cognition itself. We tried to make peace, Leon said. Real peace. Not treaties. Understanding. The thought array was supposed to bridge consciousness. Let species know each other. Feel what the other felt. No lies. No war. He clenched, shaking hands. But minds don't work like that. Not alien ones. Not even human ones. You can't pour truth into a mind like water. Some truths, they shatter. Riltok's mandibles twitched. This weapon, was it used? Leon's smile died. On us, we couldn't control it. We thought we could filter the exposure, dose the insight. But it spread. People saw things. The shape of empathy twisted into madness. Cities fell quiet. Entire colonies disconnected. It silenced itself. Alara's voice came out low. Why? Because we understood everything, he whispered. And we couldn't bear it? He showed them a file. Corrupted, fragmented, but part of the original transmission. Pulses of psychoactive language, meant not to be read, but absorbed. The weapon wasn't a device. It was an idea encoded in human neural architecture. Once unlocked, it propagated through speech, through writing, through memory. Riltok recoiled. A mimetic virus? No, Leon said. A mirror. Held to the soul of the species. And once we saw ourselves, we screamed. And then we went quiet. Alara stared at the hologram. What's left? She asked. Leon looked at her with haunted eyes. The ones who didn't break changed. A long silence passed. Then, barely above a breath, Alara asked, Are they still human? Leon didn't answer. He didn't have to. Alara paced the narrow confines of her ship's command room, the hum of the engine in her ears, nothing more than a background murmur to the storm brewing in her mind. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light, but they might as well have been ghosts. Humanity's silence. She couldn't stop thinking about it. She shouldn't think about it. Not now. Not in the middle of all this chaos. But the questions gnawed at her like a slow-acting poison dot. Was the silence a choice? Was it humanity's declaration of peace, a gesture to tell the galaxy we have nothing left to prove? Or was it something darker, something worse? A shield? A surrender? A universal giving up? Her mind churned through the possibilities, each one colder than the last. The weapon. The thought array. Could it have been some kind of preemptive surrender? If the galaxy had learned of it, of the power it held, would the Council's fear have driven them to destroy Earth first, before it could wield such terrifying power? No, that didn't fit. She knew humanity better than that. The same stubborn, defiant species that had stared down death and come back stronger. But now? Now they were gone. Every communication, every distress signal, every message from Earth, it had stopped. Months ago. No transmissions, no ships, no messages. Not even a trace. Had they really chosen to remain silent? Or had someone already found them? The thought twisted inside her. That unshakable feeling that, somehow, she had been left behind. That Earth was no longer a place of refuge. It was just gone. Riltok, ever the observer, had noticed her silence, but he'd said nothing. He couldn't understand. Not yet. Alara didn't want to admit it, not even to herself, but she was beginning to feel a growing truth settle deep within her chest. She wasn't just losing her people. She was losing her home. And she didn't know if there would be anyone left to save. The log was static, distorted, fractured. Pieces of it flickered like the remnants of a dying star. But even through the fragmented data, Alara could hear the terror in the voice of the commander who recorded it. This is Captain Juno Aldrich of the Epsilon Hope. We've encountered something impossible. We've tried everything. Nothing works. If this transmission gets out, do not engage. It takes everything. We are the last ones left. Asterisk. The signal cuts out. Alara played the sequence again, searching for meaning in the gaps. She had seen first contact logs before. She knew the drill. Diplomacy, misunderstanding, alien tech. But this wasn't first contact. This was something else. B. Name of the ship Epsilon Hope was familiar. It was part of Earth's deep space exploration fleet. The log, recovered from the ruins of a shattered station in the Orion sector, was one of the few surviving pieces of evidence of what really happened during the Orion collapse. And it wasn't just alien. The captain's words didn't fit any standard report. The entities they encountered, the Void, weren't hostile in the way a warlord or an invader would be. They didn't fire weapons or declare war. No, the Void consumed something far worse than matter. It consumed the very essence of being. The logs provided a glimpse into the entity's nature, if you could even call it a nature. It wasn't alive. It didn't exist. Not in the way anything else did. It was a vast, black expanse that spread outward across space, swallowing not just ships and stations, but thoughts, minds, reality itself bent around it. People who came into contact with the Void were twisted, caught in loops of confusion. Their memories shredded, their identities unraveling like threads in the wind. Some became mindless husks, their thoughts entirely consumed, while others, far worse, ceased to exist altogether. The report was clear. It devoured the concept of self. The crew, they're gone, all of them. They weren't killed, they were erased. Even the ship is gone. There's nothing left. Just empty space. Whatever this is, it's not like anything we've encountered. As the log played, Alara felt a cold shiver crawl across her skin. It wasn't just fear. It was the understanding that this entity wasn't just another enemy. It was a concept, a force that erased the very foundation of thought itself. Her fingers trembled as she navigated to the next fragment. The data was even more corrupted here, but one word cut through the static. Containment? Containment? The Epsilon Hope wasn't destroyed because they attacked. It was destroyed because they tried to contain the Void, the thought array, the weapon humanity had created to unlock universal empathy. It wasn't a tool of war. It was something else entirely. It was humanity's answer to a force that could wipe out everything they were. To survive the Void, Earth had realized something no one else could. They had to contain the Void by removing the very thing it sought to consume their consciousness, their thoughts, their identities. A thought, weapon to prevent the anti-consciousness from erasing them. God, Alara whispered. Earth had made a decision. Not in attack, but in defense. The weapon was not to destroy. It was to seal themselves off, to block the Void from claiming their minds. A choice between erasure and silence it was. An entire species locking away its consciousness. To protect itself from the threat of annihilation. At first, Alara refused to believe it. She stared at the decrypted line of data like it might rearrange itself into something less horrifying. But it didn't. It simply glared back, cold and absolute. Silence was not abandonment. It was containment, not of the Void, but of themselves. She ran the next sequence of logs recovered from Leon Cross's vault. They had been corrupted, overwritten by time and entropy. But the fragments were enough. She watched images flicker. Across the screen, crowds of humans standing in complete stillness, cities full of life yet utterly mute. Eyes that watched but did not question, did not speak, did not think in any active sense. And then the annotation burned into the metadata. Like a brand, initiated cognitive suppression protocol, 9A. Global thought regulation achieved. Hive state, neutral. It struck her harder than any explosion. They had done it. Humanity hadn't survived the Void. They had smothered themselves to endure it. The thought array hadn't fired outward. It had turned inward, reprogrammed by necessity. The weapon, once designed to unify minds, was re-engineered to suppress them instead. A brilliant act of collective self-sacrifice. The dampening field created by the array suppressed conscious activity on Earth, just enough to slip beneath the perception threshold of the void. No flashes of emotion, no peaks of cognition, no self-aware spikes to draw attention. Earth had become quiet, not because it had been destroyed, but because its people were hiding from their own thoughts. The silence wasn't just a defense mechanism. It was a cage, a prison built by the most adaptable, defiant species in the galaxy, a species that had stared down extinction, not with weapons or armies, but by forcing itself into a kind of living death, a world full of minds locked just below the level of true awareness, existing, functioning, but never thinking freely. The cost was incomprehensible. Creativity, curiosity, love, fear, expression all smothered beneath layers of neurocognitive dampening. Families forgetting who they were. Children raised without stories. Lovers who had once whispered dreams to each other now stood in cold silence, unable to remember why their hearts beat faster when they touched. And yet, it had worked. The void had receded. It fed on consciousness, and Earth had offered it none. A barren banquet of dull minds. Alara stumbled back from the console, as if the information physically struck her. She gasped, not in pain, but in awe. Horror, reverence, they hadn't destroyed. The void, they had outsmarted it. This was humanity's ultimate act. Not domination, not conquest, but self-erasure, a tactical, precision-engineered silence designed to save the species at the cost of everything that made it human. And here she was, one of the few to leave Earth before the array had reached full activation, a stray echo of an era that no longer existed. She looked down at her shaking hands, the only movement in a room otherwise filled with unbearable stillness. For the first time since the Orion collapse, she understood. Not just the fear, not just the desperation, but the choice. A silence loud enough to drown out a god. She turned slowly toward Riltok, who had stood silently during the playback. The alien's multiple eyes were wide, overwhelmed, shaken. They didn't die, she whispered. They chose to fade. He responded with the quietest words his species could muster, and in doing so, became invisible to a predator that sees only minds. The silence of Earth wasn't cowardice. It was strategy. An act of collective defiance carried out in the most extreme, human way possible. They had silenced themselves, not in fear. With her discovery, time was running out again. If she brought attention back to Earth, if the void sensed activity again, the galaxy wouldn't just lose a species. It would awaken a force that unmade meaning itself. The council chamber was a massive, open structure, its walls made of translucent crystals that pulsed with soft, eerie light, casting the proceedings in an almost dreamlike glow. A vast assembly of alien species, their forms alien in ways that defied categorization, sat before the central dais where Ilara stood, hands gripping the podium until her knuckles were white. Her breath came in shallow bursts. There was no time to waste. We cannot ignore humanity any longer. Grandmaster Valor's voice echoed, the deep rumble of it vibrating through the chamber. He was a towering figure, 6 arms crossed in front of him, his face hidden behind a mass of ceremonial robes. The galaxy has waited for this moment, awaited humanity's re-entry into the galactic community. The Peace Fleet is a necessary first step in ensuring they are ready for the future we've all envisioned. Ilara clenched her teeth. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. A peace fleet? To Earth? She had been fighting this for months now, ever since her discovery. About the void and the catastrophic decision humanity had made to silence itself. No one was listening. No one seemed to grasp the gravity of what was at stake. She had begged, argued, and at times screamed that if they made contact, if they drew attention to Earth again, they would awaken the void. But each time she was met with either confusion or outright dismissal. Commander Voss, A voice called out from the rear of the chamber, sharp and dismissive. High Counselor Cerise, a cold-blooded strategist from one of the galaxy's most militarized races, looked at her with disdain. "We understand your concerns, but you're suggesting that an entire species, one that has been silent for decades, is somehow incapable of re-entering galactic society without triggering an ancient godlike force? Surely, Commander, you are overstating the risks. The nerve of them." The Council, comfortable in their ignorance, thought they could waltz into the home of a species that had quietly locked itself away from the universe for fear of an unfathomable predator, and that they would be greeted with open arms. She shook her head, frustration bubbling up. "You don't understand. You haven't seen the logs. You don't know the danger you're inviting. If you send a fleet to Earth, you will trigger something that cannot be undone. The void is still out there. It's waiting. It's only dormant because humanity silenced itself, because it chose to hide from the very thing you now seek to awaken." Her voice echoed through the chamber, and for a fleeting moment she thought she had reached them. She saw a few faces falter. There were murmurs, but they were fleeting, drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of alien voices clamoring for action. They were blinded by their vision of a utopian peace, a united galaxy. Their obsession with bringing Earth into the fold into their idealized vision of the future overruled any sense of caution. "We have reviewed the data, Commander," Valor said, his tone slow, deliberate. "The thought array was a choice, made by a dying species to ensure their survival. Humanity is not weak. They are survivors. And now it is time for them to join the greater family of worlds." That was when Alara realized the depth of her isolation. The voices of reason, of caution, were no longer there. She was alone in this fight. "You're wrong," Alara spat, her voice cutting through the rising din. "Humanity wasn't surviving it, was hiding. You're walking into a trap, and I won't let you drag us into it." The room fell silent, every eye now trained on her. The weight of their gazes felt heavier than any star, but the silence didn't last long. Counselor Cerise sneered. "Enough, Commander. This hysteria is unbecoming of your position. Your time here is over. You've lost all credibility with your baseless accusations." Her chest tightened. The words hit like a physical blow. "I warned you," Alara muttered, her voice low, hoarse with emotion. "I warned you." Without another word, the Council voted. The decision was swift, as predictable as it was inevitable. A peace fleet was to be dispatched to Earth within the next few weeks. And Alara? She was branded as unstable. Her objections were dismissed. Her warnings ignored. She stood in the center of the chamber, the weight of her failure settling over her like a blanket of cold, suffocating steel. Alara paced the small, sterile room, her boots clicking sharply against the cold metallic floor. She could feel her heart hammering, each beat a reminder of the fragile line she walked between control and madness. The weight of the Council's decision pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She had failed. Everything she had fought for, every sleepless night spent studying data, every argument, every warning had amounted to nothing. The peace fleet was being sent. Earth was going to be dragged back into the galaxy, whether they were ready or not. And the void was waiting, like a predator circling its prey. "I told them." Alara's voice cracked as she spoke the words aloud, as though saying them could make them real, could give her the power to undo what had been done. Her hands trembled, and she pressed them against her eyes, trying to push away the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Anger, guilt, grief, it all collided. A storm she couldn't weather. A soft click at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ril Tok stepped in, his 6 eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. His presence was almost silent compared to the noise of her mind. It was a welcome contrast. But today, Nothing felt quiet. "You're angry," Riltok said simply, his voice low and measured, as it often was. "Angry?" Elara scoffed, dropping her hands. "I'm furious. I'm devastated." Her words were sharp, filled with emotion that had been building up for far too long. I tried, and they didn't listen. They're going to destroy us. They're going to wake up the void. And her voice caught in her throat, her chest tightening as the grief hit her all at once. The helplessness, the crushing weight of knowing that no one would believe her until it was too late. For a long moment, Riltok remained silent, his multifaceted eyes studying her with a deep, almost uncomfortably intimate focus. He stepped closer, the faint scent of his species, something musky and sharp filling the air between them. Elara. His voice was softer than usual, the weight of his own pain threading through the syllables. "You are not alone in this." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You don't understand. No one understands. They think I'm crazy. They think I'm paranoid. I've failed. I failed them. I failed Earth." "No," Riltok said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder, his six-fingered grip surprisingly gentle. "You have not failed." Elara froze, meeting his eyes. She knew he wasn't just saying empty words. She could feel the sincerity in his tone, the weight of something deeper behind those words. Riltok had always been her most steadfast ally, but this was different. This was more than duty. "You don't get it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've lost so much already." "My daughter," Riltok nodded, understanding the words she didn't have to finish. The loss of her daughter, a child taken in the massacre during the Orion collapse. A loss that had haunted her, driven her forward, fueled her anger, her obsession. That loss had become her own personal void and endless, gnawing absence that she couldn't escape. But Riltok was different. He had known loss too. "I lost a broodmate," he said softly, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "It wasn't an enemy who took him. It wasn't a disease or an accident." His many eyes flickered, a shadow passing over his expression. He shut himself down. He chose to stop feeling, to stop thinking, because the pain became too much to bear. "I watched him fade, Elara, day by day, piece by piece, until there was nothing left." Elara's heart twisted in sympathy, the rawness in Riltok's words settling into her own chest like a wound. She had never asked about his past, his personal history. They had always been allies, but never friends, not in the truest sense. Yet here he was, offering her a piece of his own suffering, piece of the very thing that had shaped him. "I couldn't save him," Riltok continued, his voice a quiet rumble. "But I can save you, and I will save Earth." The statement hit her like a shockwave. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. Riltok, this alien being who had witnessed so much pain, so much destruction, was offering her something hope. A chance to undo the worst mistake they could make. "Riltok," she whispered, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're not going to go back to the council, are you?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, his eyes narrowed, the deep-set gaze of his species sharp and unwavering. "I will not. The fleet. It cannot reach Earth. It must not." Elara's heart pounded as the realization set in. "You're defecting." "Yes," he said, his voice calm, as though he had already made his decision. "I choose to believe you. I choose to stand with you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Elara felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel. Relief. It wasn't much nothing in their situation was. But it was something. And for once, it was enough. The air in the cramped command room was thick with tension. Elara stood before the control panel, her eyes scanning the holographic display of Earth. Her fingers hovered above the glowing console, A hesitant pause before committing to the only course of action left. Behind her, Riltok stood still, his 6 eyes flicking between the screens and her. I don't have silently a choice, waiting for Elara muttered to herself, more for her own clarity than for any reassurance from Riltok. Her voice was barely audible, the weight of the decision crushing down our chest. The fleet was already in transit counting. Down the days before they reached Earth, every second was a step closer to disaster. And Elara had just learned the hard way that waiting for someone to listen was futile. The Council had made their choice. Now it was up to her to make hers. We'll never reach Earth in time, Elara said, pacing as the reality set in. Even if we leave now, the fleet will arrive days before we do. But her voice faltered. A sudden flash of memory, her daughter's face, lost in the chaos of the Orion collapse, flashed before her eyes. Could she really do it? Riltok was silent. For a moment before speaking, his tone low and understanding. If we cannot stop the fleet. Elara nodded, cutting him off. Then I'll trigger the thought array myself. I'll do it manually. Her hands were trembling, but she balled them into fists. The very thought of using the weapon again sickened her, of forcing humanity into another generation of silence. But the alternative, releasing the void, was far worse. If I can't stop them from landing on Earth, she said, her voice gaining strength, then I'll turn the weapon back on. It's the only way to keep Earth safe. To keep everyone safe. Riltok nodded, his posture unwavering, despite the gravity of the situation. Then we must act quickly, if we're to reach Earth in time. I know, she said, her jaw tightening. I'm already packing the ship. It's our only shot. If we fail, her voice trailed off. We won't fail, Riltok said, his voice unwavering. Not while I'm with you. Elara turned away from the console, a single bitter tear slipping down her cheek before she wiped it away. There was no room for tears now, only action. The descent began in silence, not the technical silence of engines idling or the hush of a vacuum chamber. This was something deeper, something wrong. As Elara and Riltok's ship entered the atmosphere, it was as if the planet itself had forgotten how to speak. No hails, no warnings, no heartbeat. Clouds swirled in thick, sluggish formations below, grays and blacks clinging to the earth like bruises on old flesh. The cities once seething with light and motion were shadows of themselves, patterns of broken grid lines faintly glowing with residual power. But nothing moved, no transmissions, no signals. Elara watched from the cockpit window, her breath shallow. Where is everyone? Beside her, Riltok leaned forward, tapping into the ship's sensory web. There is activity, but not life, he said after a moment. There are pulses faint, rhythmic, like echoes, cognitive imprints, caught in the atmosphere, but no direct consciousness. Residual thought? She asked. Yes, or he hesitated, or something using the memory of thought. A chill traced her spine. The surface came into view what was once the Eastern Reach, home to sprawling arcologies and the remnants of old world cities. Tower skeletons jutted from the mist like broken ribs. Some still pulsed faintly with energy, their cores still trying to sustain phantom systems long after the minds they served had gone silent. Elara reached out through the neural relay, syncing her awareness with the planetary net. Static met her like a scream crushed beneath water. Not silence, but something worse. There were flicker shards of memory and identity that drifted aimlessly, like broken glass scattered through oil. She caught a brief impression, a lullaby, hummed in a child's voice, lost mid-note. Then a burst of laughter, hollow and disconnected from any source. It wasn't life. It was a recording of what life used to be. And then came the tremor. It rippled not through the ground, but through thought. A mental quake, impossible to localize, like a pressure change in the soul. Ilara gasped, grabbing the console for balance. Riltok flinched, his hands reflexively drawing toward his temples. "The void," Ilara whispered. "It knows we're here." They had crossed some threshold, some invisible barrier Earth had laid down in its sleep, and now the thing beneath. The surface was watching, not with eyes, not with sound, but with hunger. It was like a pit opening inside her, vast and unknowable, filled with the absence of everything she had ever cared for. Her daughter's voice seemed to vanish from memory, as if the void was trying to erase even that. "No," she growled, teeth clenched. "You don't get to take that." Riltok's voice was strained. "We must find the thought array, quickly." Ilara nodded, refocusing. Their ship angled downward toward the coordinates of the old array, hidden beneath what had once been the cradle of human research and madness. The planet may have been asleep, but the weapon remained the same technology that had kept the void at bay at the cost of Earth's collective voice. They hadn't just returned to a dead world. They had returned to a cage. And something inside it was beginning to wake up. The shadows deepened. The thought flickers grew more erratic. Memory collapsed in on itself. But Ilara's resolve held. She gripped the controls and dove toward humanity's final choice one. Last silence, or the scream that would end all minds. The memorial core lay hidden in the catacombs beneath Earth's surface, a relic of human ingenuity and desperation, buried deep beneath layers of rock, metal, and time. Ilara's ship touched down at the entrance to the compound, its engines thrumming faintly against the unnatural stillness of the planet. The ground outside was desolate, the air thick with the echoes of a humanity that had once stood proudly at the edge of the stars. But the silence here was different. It wasn't just the absence of life. It was the kind of silence that made her skin crawl, the kind that suggested something was waiting just out of sight. Inside, the compound stretched. Vast and cold, its corridors lit only by the faint glow of emergency power. Walls lined with ancient consoles hummed with dormant energy, as if they too were waiting for a command that would never come. Ilara led the way, Riltok close behind, his 6 eyes scanning the shadows, alert to the threat she felt but couldn't yet see. "It's here," she murmured, her voice thick with a mixture of dread and determination. She reached out, touching the console in front of them, and it sprang to life, unlocking the final access doors to the memorial core. The core was massive and intricate, circular chamber that pulsed with an eerie, resonating hum. In its center stood the weapon, an immense crystalline structure, veins of light running through its surface like a shattered consciousness, the remnants of countless minds long since absorbed. The thought array, the weapon that had saved Earth from the void and condemned it to silence. "This is it," Ilara said, her heart pounding in her chest. The machine glowed with the unmistakable light of ancient technology. It was a weapon that had once been humanity's last defense, and it was now their only hope. She had to activate it, had to ensure it would work again. But as she moved closer, a low hum filled the room, and the lights dimmed for a brief second, just enough to make her pause. Then it happened. A wave of dizziness washed over her, so sudden it nearly brought her to her knees. She reached for Riltok for support, but his voice came in a whisper, distorted and strange. "Ilara, listen." She blinked, and before her stood a figure and image woven from her own memories. Like a half-remembered dream. It was her daughter, but it wasn't her. The figure was an illusion, a distortion of her deepest desires. And grief. The smile was wrong, the eyes too bright, too hollow. "Ilara," the figure whispered, a voice dripping with sweetness and sorrow. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to suffer anymore. You've done enough. Surrender. Let it all go. Let the silence heal you." Ilara froze, her breath catching. In her throat, her heart raced, her body tingling with a sudden, overwhelming sense of warmth and peace. It felt like home, like a place where there was no more fighting, no more loss. The void was offering her what she had always wanted, peace, but it was a lie. No, Elara whispered, her voice trembling. She stumbled back, clutching her chest, struggling against the tidal wave of emotion that threatened to pull her under. No, the illusion of her daughter faded, replaced by the dark, swirling mass of the void. Its presence in her mind was like a pressure on her skull, a weight so heavy that it felt like it might crush her. She could hear its whispers, cold, comforting, and insidious. You can't win, Elara. You can't stop us. We are the end of all things. You can choose peace. Let go. You've earned it. Her hands shook as she fought to stay focused. The illusion of peace, it felt so real, but she knew better. She had seen the true nature of the void. It wasn't peace. It was a lie. A total erasure of identity, of thought, of being. A void of existence itself. No, Elara repeated, louder this time, her voice steadier. I won't let you take us. She looked toward the core, the glowing structure pulsing with silent energy, waiting for her command. The weight of her. Decision pressed down on her, but she didn't waver. She couldn't waver. With shaking hands, she reached out and keyed in the activation sequence. The void's whispers grew louder, but Elara drowned them out. She had a mission, a purpose. She would not allow the darkness to consume her or the rest of humanity. Not again. The core hummed louder now, the power building. The weapon was awakening, ready to silence the void once more. Ready to give humanity a chance. Riltok's voice broke through the haze in her mind, steady and real. Elara, it's working. The weapon is responding. Wasn't over yet. The void was still in her mind, still clawing at the edges of her consciousness. But she was no longer afraid. Not anymore. The room hummed with energy, a low, ominous thrumming that shook the very air around them. Elara's fingers hovered above the console, but this time, they weren't simply activating a weapon. They were becoming part of it. Her mind, her consciousness, her very being, was about to merge with the thought array, to be woven into its complex neural web. She had already given so much. But now, to protect humanity and prevent the void's final awakening, she would give the most sacred thing of all herself. The illusion of her daughter flickered in her mind again, but Elara steeled herself against the pull of it. She had faced the void before, in fragments, in shadows. This time, it wouldn't consume her. She would be the one to break it. Her breath shallow, she closed her eyes, the memories flooding her all at once. The laughter of her daughter, soft and full of joy. The tender moments between them, small gestures of love that had once been the fabric of her life. And then the terror of the screams as the Orion collapse destroyed everything she had ever known. No more. No more silence. She keyed in the command to interface with the weapon, and the crystalline core before her flared to life. But this time, there was no coldness, no distance. The weapon was alive in her hands, its tendrils of power reaching into her mind, pulling at her essence. Her memories swirled like a storm. Grief, loss, the agony of watching her people suffocate. Beneath the weight of silence, her heart breaking as her daughter vanished from existence. And beneath it all, a deep, burning hope, a defiance. I will not be erased. The weapon pulsed in response, its power surging into Elara's mind. Her soul trembled under the pressure, but she fought to hold her ground. She fed it everything: her love, her pain, her humanity. The complexity of human emotions, every bond, every tear, every dream. The void recoiled. It couldn't digest it. Void was a consuming force in absence, a devouring emptiness. It thrived on simplicity, on the blankness of mind and soul. But it couldn't understand the tangled web of emotions Ilara had fed into the weapon. Grief, joy, rage, love, they were too complicated for the void to absorb, too human. It faltered, unable to process the complexity of her thoughts. And that was when Ilara understood. She could break it. A shriek of pure, unfiltered sound filled her mind, an explosion of nothingness as the void writhed against the onslaught of her memories. The world around her seemed to shudder, as if reality itself was struggling to hold together. But it wasn't over yet. Ilara's mind was a battlefield. Her own identity stretched thin as she held the void back, wrestling with the very force that had nearly wiped out humanity. But something was wrong. She could feel the weapon's core fluctuating, dimming. The link between her and the weapon was weakening. The void, though fractured, was still fighting, still clawing at her, trying to tear apart the fabric of her. Consciousness. Ilara's pulse quickened, her breath ragged. She needed more time. But the weapon was failing, and there was only one person left who could give it to her. RYL-T OK. He was still at her side, but his movements had grown more strained. His armor was scratched, scorched from the possessed constructs that had begun pouring into the chamber mines twisted by the void, turned into soulless shells of what they had once been. "Ilara," Riltok called, his voice low and strained. "You must finish this." She turned her head, finding him locked in combat with a group of corrupted humans' figures that had once been peaceful, now twisted into grotesque shadows of their former selves. Riltok's movements were fluid, precise. His alien physiology allowed him to fight with a grace that was terrifying, but he was outnumbered. He was slowing. "You're not going to last." Ilara cried, but Riltok didn't even flinch. "I will," he said, locking eyes with her. "You have to stop it. You're the only one who can." His words struck her like a blow. She could see the desperation in his 6 eyes, the pain in his voice. He knew what he was about to do. He had known since the moment they had landed on Earth, but she refused to let him sacrifice himself. Not like this, Riltok no. She tried to reach out, but the connection between them was fraying. She could barely hold on to herself, let alone him. He shook his head, his mandibles clicking in what might have been a grim smile. "I chose to believe in you, Ilara. Don't let me be wrong." With that, he launched himself into the fray once more, moving faster than her mind could process, slashing through the corrupted constructs with brutal efficiency. But even as he fought, the void's influence grew stronger. He could feel the gnawing hunger of the void creeping into his mind, his body weakening with every moment. But he held on. He fought to give her the time she needed. And Ilara, with tears streaming down her face, redoubled her focus on the weapon. Her hands trembled as she poured every last bit of her strength into it. She had no choice but to finish what she had started. Riltok's voice rang out, a final desperate cry. "Do it, Ilara." Her heart shattered, but she didn't look back. The void was crumbling, its forces scattering against the storm of human emotion she had unleashed. Ilara's mind and the weapon fused, united in a single unrelenting pulse. And then, silence. The pulse that erupted from the memorial core was not the calculated silence humanity had intended. It wasn't a mere suppression of consciousness. It was a roar, a tidal wave of raw, untamed emotion. Ilara's consciousness melded with the weapon as it surged to life, no longer constrained by the sterile, emotionless directive of containment. The weapon's vast network spread outwards from the memorial core, rippling through the planet like a shockwave. For a brief moment, Ilara felt every emotion, every thought, every fear humanity had suppressed for centuries. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. In its intensity, love, grief, hope, despair, they surged through her, through the weapon, unfiltered and pure. The void, lurking like a shadow just beyond the edges of perception, recoiled. It couldn't handle the onslaught. It had been built to consume, to erase, to reduce existence to a cold, empty nothingness. But it had never encountered this. It had never known the chaotic, unpredictable force of human emotion, raw and real, unrefined and uncontrollable. Void's form wavered, its presence fragmenting, buckling under the weight of the flood that Ilara had unleashed. It tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The weapon wasn't just a tool of defense. It was a mirror of everything humanity was always meant to be. And in that reflection, the void could not survive that it wasn't destroyed. No, the void was repelled not through brute force, but through the sheer power of human identity and will. The weapon embraced what the void could not understand: vulnerability, complexity, and depth. The void was simply too empty to withstand it. Ilara gasped, the mental strain overwhelming her as she held the flood of emotion in check. She had unlocked something new, something far beyond what humanity had ever imagined. The weapon was no longer a tool for silence, nor merely a containment device. It had become a beacon, a signal sent into the galaxy, a pulse of life, of humanity's resilience, of their refusal to be erased. A beacon, but also a warning. The universe would know humanity's story now. They had endured. They had survived. The weapon's pulse slowed, its power tapering off, but the effect was unmistakable. For the first time in centuries, Earth felt. The planet alive, but dormant, for so long stirred in response. Humanity's self-imposed slumber was breaking. The weight of years of suppression lifted from their collective consciousness. It would take time. It would take years, perhaps decades, for the full effect to permeate every soul on Earth. But the process had begun. For the first time since the Orion collapse, humans could think again. They could remember. They could feel. Ilara staggered, her vision spinning, but the connection to the weapon had already begun to sever. Her body shook, but her mind remained clear, stronger than ever. The task was done. The void had been stopped. And in the process, something new had been born. Humanity was awake again, but not just as they had been before. They would be different. She opened her eyes, the weight of what she had done settling on her shoulders like a heavy mantle. She had given everything, sacrificed more than anyone had ever asked of her, but in the end, she had done what she had set out to do. The Earth was stirring. Humanity was awakening, and the galaxy would never forget the cost of their silence or the strength of their roar. The room fell into stillness. The weight of the moment pressed down on Ilara like the crushing force of 1,000 stars. Her body shook, exhausted beyond anything she had ever known. The flood of emotions had left her hollow, but her mind lingered. Her body fell to the cold floor of the memorial core, but her consciousness remained locked within the weapon. She could feel the deep hum of it, the pulse of the planet's awakening, the quiet stirrings of the human race coming back to life. She had done it. The void was gone. Humanity was awake. But the cost was more than she had ever bargained for. Her physical form lay broken, crumpled, but Ilara knew the truth now. She was trapped. Her mind, bound to the core, had become part of the weapon itself, a living sentinel. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her, the shifting thoughts of billions of minds beginning to stir. They would awaken, they would learn, they would remember. But she would not be caught in her chest, her eyes fluttering shut. But her spirit, her essence, remained entangled in the circuitry of the memorial core, forever watching, forever guarding. Her consciousness would never be free. She had saved them. She had saved humanity, but the cost was her soul. Word of what transpired on Earth spread through the stars like wildfire whispers first, then declarations, then reverent silence. The peace fleet never reached the surface. A moment the thought weapon pulsed. Their systems went dark for a heartbeat. Their consciousness brushed by something vast and unknowable. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't defense. It was remembrance. The council reconvened not in anger, but in solemnity. What had been dismissed as madness was now understood as a terrible truth. Earth had stood at the precipice and survived, not with weapons of steel, but with memory, with grief, with unrelenting human will. A vote passed unanimously. Not exile, not containment, quarantine. Earth would be left undisturbed, its orbit sealed by autonomous sentinels programmed to protect and respect. The choice of a people who had sacrificed everything to shield the galaxy from a darkness that defied comprehension. No more probes, no contact. Earth was a tomb, a beacon, and a holy ground. Across the known systems, monuments began to rise. Stone and metal forged into quiet silhouettes of human forms. Eyes closed, hands extended. Inscribed at their base, in every galactic tongue, to the ones who remember. In the political halls of power and the homes of distant colonies, the phrase became a prayer, a warning, a vow. The galaxy had thought Earth primitive, then irrelevant, then dangerous. Now they thought Earth sacred. And while no one dared approach, again, all looked toward that quiet blue world on the edge of a spiral arm, a world where silence was not absence, but presence. Earth was sealed. But it was not forgotten. The message was short. No ceremony, no military stamp, just Riltok's voice, steady but frayed at the edges, recorded minutes before the final stand. They bleed like we do, grieve like we do, but more than that. They remember, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. His eyes, filmed with exhaustion, met the recorder one last time. If survival means forgetting what makes you alive, then it's not survival. It's surrender. Humanity chose pain, and in doing so. They chose to remain whole. I stood beside one of them. Her name was Alara. She gave more than her life. She gave us understanding. The transmission ended, unencrypted, broadcasted across. His homeworld. It was replayed countless times, not in military briefings, but in learning halls, in family rooms, in quiet gatherings. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the Tokar began to shift. Broodmates began to speak of feelings they once buried. Elders shared stories of loss with uncharacteristic vulnerability. New art emerged, jagged, raw, emotional. Not because they understood humanity entirely, but because they could no longer pretend they didn't want to. Above the earth, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, uncaring, unchanging. But within, the crust of the blue planet, deep beneath oceans and silence, something stirred. The memorial core thrummed with gentle pulses like a sleeping heart, vast and unknowable. Machines spun endlessly, not with purpose but memory, as though the whole world was holding its breath. Then came the visitor, a small shuttle, battered and barely spaceworthy, floated into high orbit. Its pilot was unknown, nameless, their origin lost to the currents of time, drawn not by command, but by pull. A whisper in the dark. A story remembered. As they passed over the planet's equator, their systems lit up with a single, unencrypted signal. No coordinates, no language barrier, just 3 words transmitted with crystalline clarity. We remember you? The pilot froze, then bowed their head, whispering something back that no one heard. A moment of reverence in the vacuum of space. Beneath the planet's crust, in the stillness of memory, the core responded. Not with light, not with speech, but with presence. Inside the machine, her form barely human, suspended in energy and code. Elara felt the signal pass through her. And for the first time in years, a single tear fell. At the edge of the Urt cloud, Sensors blinked to life-silent sentinels long thought dead. Something approached. Not alien, not familiar. A vessel of obsidian alloy, its hull etched with language no longer spoken. Its signal bore Earth's genetic signature, yet twisted, refracted, evolved dot inside, no heartbeat. But intent, purpose. The memorial core registered the anomaly. Alara's fragmented mind stirred, reaching outward. Searching dot the signal, answered back not with words, but with a voice long buried in her memory dot her daughter's voice. Then, static, silence, and the stars watched as the unknown closed in. The darkness cut to black.